Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. Simplify life with diabetes. By inhaled insulin, fast in, fast out, fits your lifestyle. And by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacy Sims.
This week, her daughter was diagnosed during the first year of COVID. Now, Katie Roseborough is looking to lift up other moms of kids with type 1.
We're out to dinner, we're eating pizza, of course, because why wouldn't we be eating pizza? And Sarah had to get up to go to the bathroom like 3 or 4 times during dinner. And my sister looked at me and she said, "Have you thought about diabetes?" And I said, "Yes, I've thought about it." You know, I'm just like, don't even want to admit that I think that something serious could be wrong, which is just so horrible, you know, but I know I'm not alone. Like, I've talked to so many parents who have gone through the same thing.
Katie started a podcast. She talks about why and the story behind that, and she shares more about her family's experience. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Hey everybody, welcome. I'm Stacy. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. And this week, as you are listening, I am so lucky to be surrounded by so many people in the diabetes community because I am at Friends for Life. I am recording this episode before I go, but the week of July 4th, I will be in July, Orlando, Florida, at the annual Friends for Life Diabetes Family Conference, and we are doing book pre-sales. I'm really excited, but I won't go into that too much here. Just follow the link in the show notes and on the website. Make sure you know the promo code. If you are going to order now, you will need a promo code. And you can follow on social media. That's in the Facebook group. And it's also been sent out in the newsletter that goes out with this show. So ping me. If you haven't gotten it, you can always reach me, Stacy, at diabetes-connections.com. I also want to let you know, no newscast this week. That will be back a week from this Friday. We do the newscast in addition to this long format episode every Friday, but not from Friends for Life. It's just a little bit too much. So definitely watch for videos and fun stuff on Instagram and on Facebook mostly. There's so much going on at the conference. What normally happens is I will make contacts and do interviews in the weeks and months to follow. So if there is something specific, if you know that a vendor is going to be there or a person is going to be there, definitely please reach out, let me know who you'd like me to speak to, and I will do my best. After this interview with Katie, I have something to tell you about my latest world's worst parenting move. Benny is away at camp, and I almost did something that I knew I would regret. So I'll share that in just a little bit. My guest this week is Katie Roseborough. She holds a doctorate in physical therapy from the University of Florida. She has 3 kids, one with type 1, as I mentioned, and she is a children's book author. Yes, she is the host of the Sugar Mamas podcast. And whenever I have another person who has a podcast on this one, I always get asked, why are you amplifying somebody else's show? Why are you giving them your airtime? And I just think that's silly. There's so much space in the diabetes community. There's no competition as far as I'm concerned. And I've always said, and I stand by this, you need to find the show that speaks to you. If it's my show, great. If it's not, audio is the best medium. Hands down. Podcasts are amazing. Search around, find a podcast that speaks to you. And if you don't find the podcast you like and you want to hear, make your own. And I'm happy to help you do that. So just reach out. You also need to know, I did an episode with Katie. I went on her show earlier this year, and we do talk about that towards the end of this interview, and I will link that up in case you haven't heard it yet. Okay, my interview with Katie in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Afrezza. And I know you have a lot of questions about Afrezza because every time I mention it, the emails and the DMs roll on in. So what is it all about? Well, Afrezza is an ultra-rapid-acting mealtime insulin. You breathe it in using an oral inhaler. Afrezza gives you the flexibility to eat what you want while providing proven blood sugar control. Afrezza's ultra-rapid action allows you to inhale your insulin right when food arrives, even unexpectedly, so you can be spontaneous but still in control without the need for injections at mealtime. Find out more and see if Afrezza is right for you. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Afrezza logo. Afrezza can cause serious side effects, including sudden lung problems and low potassium, and is not for patients with chronic lung disease such as asthma or COPD, or for patients allergic to insulin. Tell your doctor if you ever smoked, have ever had kidney or liver problems, a history of lung cancer, or if you are pregnant or breastfeeding. Most common side effects are low blood sugar, cough, and sore throat. Severe low blood sugar can be fatal. Do not replace long-acting insulin with Afrezza. Afrezza is not for use to treat diabetic ketoacidosis. Please see full prescribing information, including boxed warning, medication guide, and instructions for use on afrezza.com/safety. Katie, thank you so much for joining me. This is going to be fun.
I know. I'm really excited. Thank you so much for having me, Stacy.
You got it. Hey, let's just jump right in. You have been living with diabetes in your family for over a year now, but let's back up and start by telling me about your daughter's diagnosis. How did you all find out that she had type 1?
Yeah, so my daughter Sarah is 9 years old, and we, like you just said, we've had diabetes in our lives now for a little over a year. So it was back in August of 2020. So we're kind of like in the thick of a pandemic year. I'm in Florida. Florida was gracious enough to allow children to go back to school in person at the time. So we're gearing up for like the world's weirdest school year. Honestly, we're just kind of chugging along with our summer. We went on a couple vacations that year despite the pandemic. One of them is a vacation we go on every single year with family and friends. So we still did that. And then the last vacation we took of the summer, kind of right before school started, we were getting ready to leave. We were in Gatlinburg, Tennessee for about a week. And my husband, being like typical dad, was like, okay, family, we are going to try to make it home as quickly as humanly possible. Because for us, it's like that was about an 8-hour drive. He's like, we're going to pack our lunches because we got a lot of food left over in the fridge. I want everybody to minimize their fluid intake. All the things you shouldn't do, right? Like, telling your kids not to drink any water. He's like, we're only going to stop at rest areas. Let's see if we can, other than when we have to get gas, like we're only going to stop at rest areas. Let's try to fly home. So of course, my daughter, unbeknownst to us, is in the throes of kind of on her way to being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So she, of course, starts chugging water in the car and is asking for more water. And we're like, no, sweetheart, we're trying not to stop very much. Well, of course, she had to stop. Like it ended up being every 45 minutes or so on the way home, which I've heard people have to go even more than that when they are kind of in that pre-diagnosis phase. So she's in the back, I have to go to the bathroom again. And of course, my husband and I are like, oh my gosh, like, okay, we got to stop again. And at one point we told her, sweetheart, let's try to wait. Like we've only got an hour until we get home. And she was like, okay. And then I look back in the rearview mirror like 5 minutes later, and she just has tears in her eyes. And I was like, oh, we got to stop. This is not normal. So for the 7th or so time that day, we stopped so she can go to the bathroom. And I just feel like my red flags were up a little bit at that point because I do have a medical background. I'm a physical therapist, and we did learn about diabetes, type 1 and type 2 in school. Of course, we didn't spend a huge amount of time on that, but I remember getting those little charts in school with like the little guy, that looks like he's like just in total distress, dizzy and all this stuff, going over the symptoms for type 1 diabetes. And I remember one of them being excessive thirst, frequent urination, and weight loss. So I started putting the pieces together. I didn't want to believe it. And then the straw that broke the camel's back was we were out to dinner. This was 2 nights before school started that year. She was going into 3rd grade. And we were out to dinner with my sister and my mom. And my sister is a nutritionist or a dietitian. She's a registered dietitian, and she works primarily with type 2 diabetics who are in renal failure. So they're on dialysis, and that's her kind of patient population. So mostly type 2, but she's familiar with type 1. And anyway, we're out to dinner. We're eating pizza, of course, because why wouldn't we be eating pizza? And Sarah had to get up to go to the bathroom like 3 or 4 times during dinner. And my sister looked at me and she said, have you thought about diabetes? And I said, yes, I've thought about it. I just like don't even want to admit that I think that something serious could be wrong, which is just so horrible, but I know I'm not alone. Like I've talked to so many parents who have gone through the same thing. And I said, I'm going to take her in tomorrow. I'm hoping it's just a UTI or something along those lines, but I'm going to take her in tomorrow. And sure enough, one thing leads to another. We go to the doctor, they do a finger prick, and we get sent to the hospital immediately. And that's when our diabetes journey started. I mean, like most everybody else's diabetes journey, we kind of were a little bit blindsided, kind of noticed, but in denial. And luckily, because of the pandemic, there were some silver linings, but because of the pandemic, virtual school was an option. So she stayed home with me for that first 9 weeks, and we did virtual school, and we kind of learned how to manage type 1 together during those first 9 weeks.
So my kid was so tiny, he was 2 when he was diagnosed, and those first couple of weeks were just a nightmare because you can't explain anything. I'm curious, 9 years old is still a little kid. I mean, she's probably old enough at the time she was 8, so she was old enough to probably feel responsible and want to do stuff, but she's still tiny.
Yeah.
What were those first couple of weeks like?
Gosh, the best way I know how to describe it was like a frightened cat almost. I mean, in the hospital especially, just inconsolable crying, scared of the finger pokes and the needles. And just anytime anybody would walk into the room, she would tense up and start crying. And so those first 9 weeks were just kind of getting over the fear of first the needles and the lancets. And then, we get the Dexcom. And so it's getting over the fear of putting the Dexcom on and inserting that sensor. And so it was a lot of me just trying to calm her down. We would spend a lot of time in her room, just sitting on her bed, listening to music, getting ready to do a shot. A lot of it was, just the mental buildup on her part. She would get so nervous. So just kind of getting her comfortable with that. And then, of course, I'm frantically trying to learn diabetes as quickly as I possibly can, and also how to get her back in school as quickly as possible because, her school was wonderful about it, but we were also in the middle of a global pandemic. So it's here's one more thing for you to deal with during this, extremely trying school year. And, it's just all of that stuff, just trying to learn everything. It's so overwhelming. I don't have to tell parents of type 1 diabetics that it's just so overwhelming. So really, I was very grateful for that time to kind of be at home just with her because I sent my other 2 kids back to school. I have 2 other boys and I sent them back to school. So it was really just me and her at home, just kind of learning the best way to manage. I was thinking in the first week or 2, there's no way this girl is going to be able to go back to school. She's not going to handle this. And I mean, I'll tell you what, she proved me wrong. And she was such a champ. I mean, by the time she went back to school, she was doing her own injections. She was very responsible, very independent, just in that short 9-week period.
What helped you all? Was it time? Was it just compassion from you? Was it just doing things over and over again? I mean, I assume that you found the community pretty quickly. What helped you all get through those first couple of weeks and make that kind of that turnaround for her? Right back to Katie answering that question. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. Omnipod technology is constantly advancing, and you deserve to have the latest and greatest when you want it. No one wants to be locked into a contract. At Omnipod, they heard this. That's why they have the Omnipod Promise for users getting product through the pharmacy. The Omnipod Promise allows new and existing users to start on Omnipod Dash with no contract commitment or obligation. Then you can upgrade to Omnipod 5 at no additional cost, regardless of existing contract when covered by insurance, and get a free controller PDM with your first box of pods. Don't wait. Start on Omnipod Dash today and be ready for the latest and greatest with the Omnipod Promise. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo. For full safety risk information and Omnipod Promise terms and conditions, also visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections. Now back to Katie, talking about what helped turn things around when her family was struggling to adjust to diabetes.
Gosh, that is a great question. I mean, definitely support, not only from the type 1 community, but from just our family and friends in general. My husband and I are fortunate enough to live in a city where we are surrounded by our family. We have both sets of, my parents are here, his parents are here. So my kids have both sets of grandparents here. We've got aunts and uncles in town, cousins are in town. We have a wonderful church family that we're a big part of. We've got amazing neighbors. So, it's like we didn't even skip a beat. I mean, people were obviously recognized the fact that this was a really huge deal for us and a really big transition. But at the same time, they just kind of came alongside us and really, they were willing to learn. They were willing to take on type 1 with us and still have Sarah over to play. And, the grandparents were still willing to have the grandkids over. Eventually, we got to the point where she could still spend the night. Gosh, that was huge. And then I made it a point to hunt down a couple families who had kids with type 1 diabetics, which is hard to do during a pandemic because people are a little wary of just people in general, but especially strangers. But we were able to meet a few families that had children Sarah's age with type 1 diabetes. And I think just her seeing that and seeing that she's not alone and seeing that there are other kids her age and many, many kids that have come before her who have had to deal with this and have been successful with it. So that was just a huge help.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
When did you decide to start a podcast and why?
Yeah. Okay. So let me start by saying that I love podcasts. I'm very busy. Like I feel like I'm always doing like 3 or 4 things at one time, but I also love to read and I love to learn. And so I felt like when I became a mom, I didn't have time to do any of that because you're always busy, right? So then I find this world of podcasts and audiobooks. I should mention I also love audiobooks where you can just plug in with earbuds or, whatever it might be and just listen on the go while you're driving, while you're doing chores, anytime. So I just kind of fell in love with podcasts, found a lot of great kid podcasts for my kids that we listened to in the car. At one point, my kids were asking me if we could make our own podcast. So we did that for a little while. So I had a little podcast with my kids. Not 1 second of it was edited material. So the audio is horrible. The kids are fighting.
Yeah, but that's a great time capsule. That's awesome.
Yes. We only did it for a short period of time. It was called Carline Chats with Katie and her kids because we would do it on the way to school.
Right.
And so anyway, we stopped doing that. Sarah got diagnosed. Of course, I immediately start Googling what are the type 1 diabetes podcasts out there. Found a handful of really fabulous ones. I found your podcast. I found the Juicebox podcast. I found Pancreas Pals. There's just so many great ones. However, kind of similar to your story, because I know we've chatted, I wasn't hearing what I wanted to hear from a mom's perspective. Because I think, and you can, I'm sure, relate to this, I think as a mom in general, but definitely as a mom of a type 1 diabetic, you just see the world differently and you feel things differently and you experience things differently. That might be a vast generalization and stereotype of moms, but I think for the most part, it's true. We are typically the more emotional of the pair when it comes to, spouses or parents. And, for better or worse, that's not a bad thing necessarily. But I feel like we just have a different take on things. So I really wanted to hear from a mom about raising children with type 1 diabetes. And from what I could tell, I wasn't finding that. So I had the thought of, well, if I can't find it, maybe I'm the one that needs to create it. So that's kind of how that all got started.
Yeah. And I would agree with that because, and as you listen, especially if you're new to this show, I am not a mom podcaster. I was never a mom blogger. It's funny that you say that, generally speaking, moms, so I don't fit that box.
Oh, really?
That's not, it's not for me. I never liked mom blogs. I never read them. I never, when my son was diagnosed, there have always been some wonderful parenting blogs about, and of course I'm dating myself now because, blogs were super popular. Gosh, it's kind of weird how things change, but 10 years ago or more. But the parenting blogs for type 1 diabetes, frankly, did not appeal to me very much, even though some of them are fabulous and well written and they hold up. But I always gravitated toward reading the adults with type 1 who were talking about their current life. And that just helped me more. So again, if you don't know, as you're listening, the reason I started this show is because I felt like there wasn't a news interview show. There wasn't a news focused podcast about diabetes where I could talk to tech companies, newsmakers, that sort of thing, and ask follow-up questions that weren't being asked in our community because there wasn't a news person in our community doing it. It's funny, Katie, I kind of envisioned a couple of people saying, well, Stacy's a mom. Come on, Katie. But I agree with everything you're saying because that's not generally what I do here. This show isn't about my parenting. I've been in this community for more than 15 years now. So my involvement in his diabetes is frankly a lot less than it used to be. Our experience is so different than people who are diagnosed these days because CGM wasn't around. He didn't have a Dexcom till he was 9 and it still needed to be calibrated twice a day. So we were still poking his finger and all that kind of stuff. I'm curious, as a newer diagnosed family, what's top of mind right now? Is it technology? Is it waiting for more closed loop systems? What are your people in your peer group kind of talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question too. For me personally, I am following the closed loop situation very closely. But as a mom, speaking more personally in my own home, I'm more concerned with the emotional toll that it takes on my daughter. I think medically, I feel like, not that we're doing things perfectly by any means, but I feel like we've got a pretty good handle on how to manage the insulin and keep the blood sugars in range for the most part. And then when we have bad days, we just kind of brush it off and move on. But I just worry personally as a mom on just the emotional burden and the physical and mental load that it will take on my daughter just as she gets older. And hopefully it won't. Hopefully she'll grow up and be very independent and responsible with it all. And it won't be a huge burden in her mind. But I think just as a mom, I worry about that. And I spend a lot of time praying about that, that she'll be surrounded with wonderful friends as she grows up and be blessed with a fabulous spouse who will be compassionate and help take care of her and all those things.
I wanted to ask you too, and I don't know if it's too personal, but you've mentioned, you do have 2 other kids. Your daughter is the middle child. You've got an older boy and a younger boy. One of the most difficult things I think as a parent of kids with type 1 is parenting the kids that don't have type 1. There's just so much attention given to diabetes. How do you try to balance it or kind of deal with it?
Yeah, that is also a great question. I have a fabulous husband. So I'll give a shout out to my husband he's very involved in all of my kids' lives, but especially my boys, which that kind of sounds bad when I say it like that, but they play baseball. My boys play baseball. And my husband has always coached their teams, been on the board at the baseball field. So he really takes over that for me, which is great. So he gets to spend a ton of one-on-one time with the boys. And in the meantime, I get to spend a ton of one-on-one time with Sarah. And then, when we're not doing baseball and things like that, we try to break it up. So I feel like everybody is very loved in our family. So we try to just sneak in times where we can spend one-on-one time with each kid, and that doesn't have to be anything big. I think parents get stuck on this fact that okay, we've got to do a date night with each kid, which we've done that in the past and I love it, but it is a little overwhelming because then you've got to carve out the time and schedule the time and spend the money and things like that. I think just for parents to remember that even something as simple as crawling in your kid's bed at night and reading them, a chapter of whatever book they're reading in school, or just asking them about their day or watching a dumb video on YouTube with them that they're into, just ways to show them that you love them and support them outside of diabetes without mentioning diabetes. I do try to be very, very intentional with finding ways to praise each of my kids, just little things, because I think they do hear us talk about Sarah's diabetes a lot. It's a big focus in our house, which that's kind of unavoidable. But I want to make sure that they know that I see them too. So just little things. Like the other day, my oldest son is in vision therapy, and I took him to vision therapy early on a Saturday morning. And, I just noticed he was so sweet and respectful to the vision therapist. And so when we got in the car, I just made it a point, to tell him, I noticed that you were very respectful, very sweet to the therapist. You listened, you answered her questions, and I really appreciate that. As a mom, that really means a lot to me. So I just would encourage parents to really, even if it's the smallest, tiniest thing, you picked up your brother's lunchbox and carried it to the car for him, make it a point to let them know that you see them too and you're noticing the good things they're doing.
Do they help with diabetes? And I'll preface this by saying my daughter helped for about 3 weeks. And it was it was like when the new baby comes home from the hospital, I'm going to help. And they're like, can you send that back?
Right.
Exactly. It was the same thing. She was like, I'm going to be the best helper. And then she's like, diabetes is the worst and I want nothing to do with it ever again. And, I'm curious how your boys are.
Yeah. So they are not super helpful in the sense of actually helping. I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Definitely not helping manage her diabetes, but they are helpful in the fact that when I tell them to leave the room, they do.
Hey, that counts.
Sarah's a typical middle sister child. She will one day grow up and admit that she loved her brothers dearly, but she also, they just bicker and fight like any other kids would. And Sarah she's a force for sure. And when it comes to her brothers, can be very fierce sometimes. So for her, she really doesn't want them to have anything to do with it per se. I just appreciate the fact that if it's pump change time or Dexcom sensor change time, you just got to have to read her really. If she's in the mood where she is okay with them being in the room, then that's fine. But most of the time she's not. So they help in the sense that they will butt out of it when I ask them to.
Hey, that's significant. I mean,
Yeah.
we just told both our kids, you need to look out for each other regardless of diabetes. So
Yeah.
like on the school bus, my daughter is older, so she knew if anything was going on with Benny that she would have to help out, but he also knew the same.
Yeah.
And then as they got older, we showed her how to use emergency glucagon, which I never in a million years did I think she'd actually use it. This is before, Baqsimi and Gvoke. This is the old red box with a giant needle. There's no way she'd remember to swirl it, not shake it,
Right.
But we did teach her how to do it just in case. But we never wanted her to feel responsible for his diabetes. And I don't know if that was the right thing or that's how we did it.
Yeah. No, I did teach my oldest son how to use, we have the nasal spray, Baqsimi, but I did teach him how to do that. And so I think in an emergency, he could pull it off. I probably need to revisit it every couple months and be like, you remember how to use this, right? Just in case, because a lot of times we're playing outside when I'm not out there and you just never know what could happen. My youngest son is probably the most compassionate, which I find amusing because Sarah and his name is Timothy. Sarah and Timothy probably get on each other's nerves the most. So I don't know. I think it's really sweet that he'll pipe up every now and then like, Mommy, I just heard Sarah's low alarm go off, or, he's concerned about her. Or like the Braves just won the World Series and one of their players is Adam Duvall and he has type 1 diabetes. So every time Adam Duvall would be up to bat or would make an amazing play, he would like go running into the other room. And, if Sarah wasn't already in there and be like, Sarah, Adam Duvall's up to bat. Adam Duvall just caught a pop fly in the outfield. Like he actually asked me to buy her an Adam Duvall baseball card off of the internet, off of Amazon. So I just bought a 99-cent Adam Duvall Atlanta Braves card off of Amazon. That's going to be his present to her for Christmas. I had to pay $2.99 shipping for it. The shipping was more than the card, but I thought it was very sweet.
So you've got the podcast. You've written a book. Your children's book is not about diabetes, though, right?
Correct. Yes, I have written a children's book, which was always a dream of mine. It's called There's a Mermaid in My Pool, and it was inspired by my childhood because I grew up with a pool in my backyard, and that's where I basically lived in the summertime. And that was also right around the time, like I'm an 80s kid. So that was right when like The Little Mermaid came out from Disney and, just totally obsessed. Like we spent hours and hours in the pool pretending like we were mermaids, my sister and I and our friends. And so the book was just kind of inspired by those happy golden days of my childhood. And yeah, it's for sale on Amazon. And I actually just reached out to the illustrator because when it's time for it to be reprinted, probably sometime early next year, I did ask him, like, would you consider adding like a CGM to the little girl's arm that's in the book? And I would not change the story at all. I have no intention of, making it about type 1 diabetes, but I thought it would be great to just bring awareness to the disease by other kids seeing kids in storybooks with, gadgets on their arms or legs or stomachs or wherever they might wear them. So that's something that I have in mind.
Are you thinking about another book or any other projects coming up?
Yes, I am. I do. I actually also talked to that same illustrator about illustrating another children's book for me, also having nothing to do with type 1 diabetes. But I won't give too much away about that. Everybody said, well, you wrote a mermaid book for Sarah, because I dedicated the book to Sarah. And they're like, you got to write one for your boys. And I'm like, you're right, I do. So I wrote one for them. And hopefully that will be published sometime next year.
Very cool. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about that I missed?
No, not at all. I mean, I just encourage any parents who just need a little encouragement along the way of their type 1 journey. And, not just encouragement, but I'm trying to educate people on what's out there and resources that can help them and, managing back to school and just all of it. I have a list of topics that I want to talk about on the podcast, and anything that will help a parent or a caregiver of type 1 diabetic or encourage them or entertain them. Sometimes the shows are just for fun, but it's fair game.
You want to talk a little bit about your teen series?
Yes. So I reached out to my group that I have on Facebook, my little group for the podcast. And I said, I really want to do another series. I've got a couple of ideas in mind, but I want to hear from you guys. Like, what would you guys like to hear about? And the vast majority of people that commented back said, I'd really love to know just more about the teen years. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm not even there yet. So I can't talk about the teen years, but I could probably hunt down some people that would be willing to talk about the teen years. And so I have I have a certified diabetes care and education specialist coming on, and she's going to talk about insulin needs, in general, what people tend to see as far as insulin needs go in the teen years. And then I had you on to talk about, just kind of I don't want to say letting your kids go, but just kind of that transition of giving them more independence and trusting them more. And then I have a psychologist coming on to talk about burnout and rebellion, eating disorders, and just helping parents and kids to maintain a good relationship during what can probably be a fairly trying time. I've got a girl coming on from the College Diabetes Network to just talk about launching your teen off into adulthood and what resources they have, and then a handful of other people. But I'm pretty excited about that. I think it's going to be good.
I got to tell you, it's funny. You can go back and listen to early episodes of this podcast and hear me freaking out about the teen years because Benny was 10.
Oh, yeah.
When I started Diabetes Connections. And now he's almost 17. And you go, those early episodes, I'm like, please give me the secrets of managing teens with diabetes.
Yeah.
And now I was thinking with your college guest, okay, that's what I have to listen to next. Because now I have to start thinking he's a junior in high school.
Yeah, I know. Gosh, that'll be here before you know it. Really soon.
Well, Katie, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time. Your podcast is a lot of fun. I know a lot of work goes into it. So thanks for everything that you're doing to help out the community.
Oh, thank you so much, Stacy. Thank you again for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacy Sims.
More information about Katie and her podcast and the episode that I'm in talking about raising a teenager with type 1. All of that at the episode homepage over at diabetes-connections.com. And raising a teenager with type 1. Yeah, it gets interesting. I want to share a story. And this is all about letting go, right? Oh my goodness. I think a lot of people think it's easier for me. Maybe I just come off like, whatever, I don't worry, la, la, la. But I want to share with you what's going on with Benny at camp. He's at camp for 8 weeks this summer, and it's not a diabetes camp. One of these stories coming up. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. Hey, my story is all about using Dexcom. Anyway, it is hard to remember what things were like before we started using Dexcom. I haven't forgotten. I guess what I mean is so different now. When Benny was a toddler, we were doing something like 10 finger sticks a day. Even when he got older, we still did at least 6 to 8 every day. More when he wasn't feeling well or something was off. But with each iteration of Dexcom, we've done fewer and fewer sticks. The latest generation, the Dexcom G6, eliminates finger sticks for calibration and diabetes treatment decisions. Just thinking about Benny's little worn-out fingertips makes me so glad that Dexcom has helped us come so far. It's an incredible tool, and Benny's fingertips are healthy and smooth, which I never thought would happen when he was in preschool. If your glucose alerts and readings from the G6 do not match symptoms or expectations, use a blood glucose meter to make diabetes treatment decisions. Learn more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. If you're new, my son was diagnosed right before he turned 2. He is 17 now, and he has gone to the same regular non-diabetes sleepaway camp every year for a different length of time since he was 8 years old. This summer is his first as a CIT, a counselor in training. It is also the first year that he gets to keep his phone in the cabin. So every year since he was 8 and has gone to this camp, we have never followed him. The first year he went, he didn't even have a Dexcom, and then it was a couple of years until Share came along. So yeah, we were fairly used to it. I think it would be a bit more jarring for a family who'd always had, access to the Dexcom numbers. We didn't have that for 7 years. So it was a lot less jarring to not have them for a couple of weeks in the summer. So Benny and I talked it out, and we decided that while I would be able to see his numbers at certain times of day, there was really no point. So he was going to, as soon as he got to camp, he was going to, I don't know what you'd call it, forget me as a follower, remove me as a follower, make it so that I couldn't see the numbers. We do communicate a little bit during camp. I mean, this summer we've been able to text because he has his phone in the cabin. But for the most part, I stay away. If he has questions or the health center has questions, they call me. When he was little, we used to check in a little bit more, once a week, check on settings, things like that, or more frequently when needed. So you get the picture. Well, we drove away from camp. We actually took a couple of days, little vacation, just me and my husband, and it was really nice. And just out of force of habit, I'm sure you do this too, you're scrolling through your apps, you have your general order of what you open on your phone, and I just bang on the Dexcom app. And lo and behold, I still had a number. And I thought, I should probably tell him. But I didn't. So then the next day, I checked and I still had a number. So I decided, all right, I'll look for a couple more days. I'll just look, in the morning. I'll move the app to the last screen of my phone so I'm not tempted. And then about, 4 or 5 nights in, 3 o'clock in the morning, the urgent low goes off. It's the only alarm I have left for Dexcom. I don't have high alerts or low alerts anymore. I only have the urgent low. And it went off. And, you wake up in a jolt and it's scary and the noises. So I look at it and I'm thinking to myself, what am I supposed to do with this? First of all, he doesn't know I'm following him, right? And second of all, we didn't make a plan because I've never followed him in the past. I always have a plan if I see the numbers. If you've heard me talk about this, and I do write about this a lot in my new book, Still, The World's Worst Diabetes Mom, out later this fall. Thank you very much. But I talk about it a lot. You have to have a plan. I had no plan. Who was I going to call at 3 o'clock in the morning? Was there somebody at the health center that would pick up the phone? Was the health center person on a mobile unit walking around camp? I had no idea. And I don't have any counselor phone numbers. I did what I usually do, which is I wait 15 minutes if I get an urgent low and I see what happened. 15 minutes later, he had treated, he was going up, and I went to bed. But I really, I felt bad. So I texted him, can you talk? What's a good time? We made a time. I think it was about 2 days later. And he called me and I fessed up. And he laughed at me. Oh, Benny. I said to him, I feel really awkward. I'm sorry, I should have told you right away, but that urgent low made me realize that I've got to let you know, and you really need to remove me as a follower. And he said, well, what do you want me to do? Do whatever you want. And I hadn't called him. He knew I wouldn't, quote unquote, bother him. And I said, no, our agreement was to remove me as a follower. And I think that that's what you need to do. So go ahead and do it. He was more than happy to remove me, trust me. And I think it's really good practice for me because he is going to college in a year. And he is surrounded currently by people who care and pay attention to him. He told me that his entire unit knows he has type 1. He's grown up with these kids. He shows them all how to use the Baqsimi, the nasal emergency glucose that he has. And then he asked me to call the health center and confirm that they had, we also have the Gvoke HypoPen, and confirm that they had that and they knew how to use that. And I had already confirmed that with them, but I figured I'm never going to pass up an opportunity to call the health center and check on how he's doing. So when I hung up with him, I called the health center and they were terrific and they were all set as well. So I will not have any Dexcom numbers until the first week of August. And I think for our situation, my style of parenting, Benny's experience, and the setting he is in, that is all fine and appropriate. And I feel good about it. I really do. If you've never turned off your Dexcom alarms and you've never turned off your Dexcom totally like I just did, it does take a day or two, I think, to kind of feel okay about it. But at least for me, it does get easier. And I know you smarty pantses who are listening to the end of this show here and are very technical. Yes, I know I can go into Clarity, right? Or I know I can go into if you use a different kind of third-party app. I know. But you know what? I'm not going to. Unless Benny asks me, I'm not going to do that because that's our agreement right now. Sometimes we're too smart for our own good. I love technology. But, we've got to keep our wits about us, and we have to use these tools to help us thrive, right? So that's what I'm trying to do. And if you see Benny, tell him it wouldn't hurt him to take a picture or two or get in a picture or two so I can see a photo of my kid at camp. Because I'm telling you, it has been few and far between this year. The older kids, they just don't take as many pictures of. And he's got a phone in his hand. Oh, boys. All right. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. Quick reminder, no In the News episode this week. I will be at Friends for Life all week. Please follow on social because that's where I'm going to be putting some good stuff from the conference. And then I will be back next week with the regular long format show. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.